My name is Daniel Gatolin. I'm one of the senior research analysts covering biotech here at Chardan. It is my pleasure to introduce Laurent Fischer, the CEO of Adverum, to our virtual ophthalmology summit, where the focus of today's discussion is on wet AMD. Laurent, welcome.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you for having us at the ophthalmology meeting.
Awesome. Yeah, always a pleasure. So to start things off, can you introduce yourself and give a brief overview of Adverum?
Sure. So I'm the CEO of Adverum, and I'm been with the company for the last 4+ years. And we're focusing on targeting the leading cause of vision loss with gene therapy. And our most advanced program is Ixo-vec, which is currently in a phase 2 study called LUNA for the treatment of wet age-related macular degeneration. So what's unique about our approach, which is unlike the native AAV2 vector that we use in the first approved product like Luxturna, that required to be administered with a complex subretinal surgery, our vector was evolved in 3 species to be able to cross the inner limiting membrane and can be administered intravitreally, which is the current standard of care for anti-VEGF injection.
Got it. Excellent. So let's spend a couple more minutes on this factor. Can you talk specifically about what it is and what specifically what changes specifically you had to make to be able to use it intravitreally?
Yes. So what AV2-7m8 refers to is this 10 amino acid peptide loop insertion called 7m8, which actually is on the surface of the virus and it enables the capsid to cross that inner limiting membrane and overcomes the limitation of the naturally occurring vectors, which are required to be administered subretinally because they actually get caught in that heparan sulfate proteoglycan membrane of the ILM barrier. So, for example, REGENXBIO has to deliver it subretinally, which is, challenging for mass market indication. So, in addition to having a simpler delivery, the advantage is that there's broad transduction of the retina cord where the disease is active, where VEGF is produced, which leads to robust anti-VEGF expression. And our vector is actually encoding aflibercept, obviously very well known protein in therapeutics in Eylea that's been used in millions of patients. So 7m8 is actually being used in 2 different clinical programs and 2 preclinical programs that should be in the clinic in the next year or so, and is viewed very much as the gold standard for intravitreal gene therapy and the first one to actually deliver it in that way.
Got it. Okay. So some of the clinical trials that are using it are your own, of course. The phase 2 LUNA trial is ongoing. You've presented some data not too long ago. Let's talk about the trial. Can you walk us through the design and data that you've seen up to this point?
Yeah, so LUNA is a 52-week study in patients that require frequent anti-VEGF injection to maintain their vision. And in LUNA, patients required 10 annualized anti-VEGF injection before receiving Ixo-vec. We evaluated 2 doses of Ixo-vec, 211 VG per eye, which is the dose that we used in OPTIC, for which we have long-term data past 4 years, and 60/10 dose, which is a lower dose that we evaluated in addition to different steroid prophylaxis regimens. So we presented recently the 26-week interim analysis of LUNA at ASRS, showing that 76% of the patients had 60/10 VG per eye, which is the dose we plan to move forward in phase 3, were completely free of injection with a 90% reduction in treatment burden. And they had all stable vision and stable CST, which is the central subfield thickness, which is essentially a measure of retinal fluid and a biomarker of disease activity. And if we looked at the broader patient population of patients that require 6 or less injections per year, we saw overall 90% of the patients being totally free of injection across both doses. So that was, best in class from an efficacy perspective. From a safety perspective, we saw no SAEs, no vasculitis, no retinitis, no vascular occlusion, and all adverse events were mild to moderate anterior chamber of vitreous cells and pigmentary changes that have no impact on vision. And overall, 91% of the patients had 0 or traces cells with local steroid prophylaxis at any visits through the week 26. And if you focus on the 60/10 group that completed their steroid prophylactic regimen, they were all off and none required to receive more steroids to control inflammation. So if you look at this compared to the OPTIC 211 data at similar time point, this actually compares very favorably. And what we know,
Mhm.
I think it's an important, factor in the whole program, is that through 3 years in optic, nearly all patients were free of inflammation at year 1 and all at year 2. And any inflammation that was seen was responsive to local steroid and resolved. I think one of the exciting new efficacy endpoint we evaluated in that study was patient preference. We did a survey which actually asked patients whether they preferred Ixo-vec to their prior standard of care with regular intravitreal injection. And if you think about patient preference, it's really a measure of effectiveness that includes, vision, efficacy, safety, the prophylactic, convenience. And what we saw is that 88% of the patients say they preferred Ixo-vec to the current standard of care, and 93% said they would take it in the other eye. They had bilateral disease, which, as we know, affects about 42% of the patients.
Got it. Okay. So that's great to hear about the patient feedback. Also curious about the physician's feedback, because that I think will factor in as well in adoption of Ixo-vec. Can you comment on that?
Yes, absolutely. So we had many interactions as part of, discussing our plans for phase 3. And we're very excited to see that, all retina specialists want to participate in the phase 3 trial. What they note is that this is clearly a best-in-class target product profile, and the durability, the injection-free rates, and the, aflibercept protein levels, which we've shown in Luna as well as in Optic through 4.5 years, actually stable aflibercept levels delivered with a single intravitreal injection. So the clinical benefits, the ability to reduce treatment burden, preserve vision, and keep eyes dry, particularly in patients that had a lot of fluid at baseline and high CST. And I think very importantly, an inflammation profile that is manageable with local steroid, does not impact vision, goes away, is part of what they care about. And obviously, we all really want to deliver a safe and effective, potential one and done treatment with gene therapy.
Got it. Okay. So another question I have with respect to Ixo-vec and potentially identifying the best population of patients who would get the most benefit from it. As you mentioned, you've tested it in broad range of baseline patients or patients with broad baseline characteristics with some very severe patients. From the physician's standpoint or from your standpoint, is there a level of anti-VEGF injections that you believe physicians and patients are looking for when they decide on which therapy to go after or to receive?
Yeah, so maybe parsing your question in two ways. First of all, is what is the patient population that's best suited for Ixo-vec? And of course,
Mm-hmm.
the first studies target the hardest to treat patients, known as frequent flyers, that receive 10 injections per year. We saw that 76% free of injection in 6 months. We know in Optic, it was 60% year 1 and then 50%, over 50% year 2 and 3. So we think that we can get half of the hardest to treat patients totally free of injection. If we look at patients who need less frequent injection, maybe the more common patient, that is up to 90% at 6 months. And it's not unthinkable that we could actually have 75% of the patient totally free of injection. So I think that this is broadly applicable to, most patients that require anti-VEGF as long as they respond to anti-VEGF. But,
Mm-hmm.
the target for me is that at least 50% of the patients should be free of injection for life. I think patients would like to be free of injection for life with preserved vision. That's what our patient preference survey says. We know that's what they need. They talk about how transformative this is. And, by avoiding these fluctuation in fluid with the current standard of care, even if with a longer acting, VEGF, there's still fluid that comes and goes. That trampoline effect we know is actually associated with poor vision outcome. We know that patients see better colors, better at nights. They tell us they can go back to doing activities. So I think there's a potential to also do better on vision. And, we measure vision with, black letters on the white background, but vision, as we all know, is a lot more than that. And we hear that from patients. So I think the goal for patient and physicians should be free of injection for life. That's essentially a functional cure for most patients, and that's what we're aiming for.
Got it. Okay. And I mean, while I think it's achievable for some, obviously it won't work for everyone, but many patients would still benefit. Many patients may still see significant reduction in treatment burden I think the number quoted in industry is around 50% if patients see 50% reduction in treatment burden or more, that would be considered a success. Are you hearing the similar message? Is your bar about the same? Is your bar higher?
I think my bar is higher. I mean, as you mentioned that, these patients, even they require an occasional injection, they will have stable levels of aflibercept on board that protects their vision, keeps their eyes dry. They may have
Mhm.
reasons to be reinjected for a burst in disease activity, a hemorrhage that could be vision threatening. But having that aflibercept on board is really key for these patients, that freedom of being able to go about their life. A lot of them are elderly. They may be hospitalized. We know that when they skip one injection, the amount of fluid can increase dramatically. So I think my bar is 50% free of injection, and overall an 80% reduction in annualized anti-VEGF is really the bar. So we've seen a lot of improvements with the current treatments. Some go up to 12 to 16 weeks. Interestingly,
Mhm.
Vabysmo obviously is doing quite well. And we had 10 patients that came in, our study that had received Vabysmo. And all 10 of these patients at 26 weeks are free of injections. So it tells you two things. There's, a lot of improvements, but still a great amount of unmet medical need. These patients are willing to try something new and a great benefit of gene therapy that's not seen with the current treatment. Even, if you think about, being diagnosed with wet AMD, you're going to require lifelong injections. Even if you looked at potentially over 5 years with TKIs, you'd receive 10 implants over 5 years. We see that, most of the patient would have one injection over 5 years. I think that's a big difference. And of course, for me, it's the long-term benefit risk that matters. And we have that long-term data in OPTIC at, 211, and we now have been able to show a tenfold safety margin by dropping from
Mhm.
the original 6E11 to 6E10 with best-in-class efficacy, which they think this is really important as we move into phase 3.
Got it. Okay. Um, so I mean, we have the options that you mentioned that patients currently have, Vabysmo, Eylea, now HDA, Eylea, and so on. I mean, these are all effective therapies, right? There's no question about that. Obviously the question is about the treatment intervals, right? Patients want to be dosed less and get a longer benefit. Uh, Taking all these factors into account, assuming, gene therapy, Ixo-vec, goes, through phase 2 successfully, go through phase 3 trial successfully, and is approved, what do you think the commercial adoption would look like?
So, I mean, obviously, with novel therapies, there's always a learning curve, right? And I think they're early adopters, late adopters. We clearly see that, it's the highest treatment burden patients that will be treated first. But eventually, I
Mhm.
think as people are comfortable with and see the long-term benefit of these treatments, I think a majority of the patients will be eligible to receive gene therapy. And, if you think about that patient preference survey that we have, um, patients have a voice, and I think they'll be keen to try these new therapies with the potential to be, free of injection for life, essentially a functional cure, right? So, if you think about cancer as an analogy, um, you could get chemotherapy to kind of be stable, or you can have CAR T cell and be cured. Which one would you prefer, right? It depends on the disease and how you feel about it. But here we have a therapy that's given once intravitreally and several weeks of a local steroid eye drop prophylaxis, potentially a steroid implant. I think that benefit risk for patients is really there. The other thing that I think is important to re-understand is the treatment practice and the current, how this fits into the current model of those practices. And the fact that this is an individual, delivery product puts it in the current buy and build, paradigm, which is really important for the retina specialist for the adoption. So an opportunity for potentially practices to do better by using gene therapy than the current standard of care.
Got it. Okay. So to go back on some of the numbers that you mentioned from Luna, I think some patients saw more than 90% reduction in supplemental injection. I think between 75 and 80+% were injection free at 6 months. between the 6E10 and 2E11 doses. Can you dive in a little bit deeper in terms of the differences that you see with 6E10 and 2E11 doses, and what were the major driving factors for you to choose the lower dose for your pivotal trials?
Yeah, so when we started Luna, the hypothesis based on non-human primate data we generated a couple of years ago was that we could lower the dose, see still the same levels of aflibercept expression, see the same level of efficacy with, as we know in gene therapy, lower doses translating an improved safety profile. And that's exactly what we've seen. We've seen that we continue to see efficacy of 76%. That compares actually slightly better than what we saw in OPTIC at 211. So within that flat burst of the dose response, and we saw slightly better safety as well. We saw only in the steroid eye drop alone group at 6E10, only one patient had tracer cells at 26 weeks, and one patient had 2+ cells, single time point at 211. So there's clearly a slight difference, and the goal is to really come up with a target product profile that optimizes efficacy and safety, and that's why we've confirmed our hypothesis going into Luna that we could dose down, extend the prophylactic regimen, and come up with an optimal target product profile. And that's why we're moving with 6E10 in phase 3, which has, again, best-in-class efficacy. Nobody comes close to the percent of patients that are free of injection. We think 50% is a minimum. We'd like to do 60, 75%, in a broader patient population. We've seen that actually, over 90% in patients with 6 or less injections. And that's something that also is well understood, well managed with a clean safety profile. So we think we've established that safety margin of 10x, which I think is a nice thing to do in humans, much greater safety margin with the preclinical, non-clinical data. And that gives us the confidence to move to phase 3 with a safe product that can be used in a broad patient population with only the use of local steroid prophylaxis.
Okay, got it. And I guess a couple of questions along similar lines. Number one, what are the key learnings as you advance from Optic to Luna, and now you're planning for phase 3 in terms of baseline population? How you're thinking about that? What are the key differences between the Optic and Luna? Yeah, let's start here.
So Optic was a first in human study that we started almost 6 years ago. So most patients are out to 5 years. We're going to continue to present data long term to really show the benefit long term of gene therapy, which is unlike the existing anti-VEGF products or even the ones in development. And so we had patients that required frequent injections, similar in both studies, about 10 injections annualized. Patients in Luna versus Optic studied better vision, and they were slightly drier at baseline. So there are essentially two groups. The patient that had no fluid that were well maintained with frequent injections, we saw that we're able to maintain these patients dry essentially. And the patient that had actually quite a bit of fluid baseline, over 300 micron, and we saw that we could drop that CST to physiological level essentially, and that it stayed completely stable. And that really maps out well with the long-term aflibercept data we've shown, where in every patient, the levels are stable from week 12 to 14 when we measure it for the first time, all the way to 4 years. So we're the only company that's shown that long-term data and their ability to maintain eyes dry, even with the hardest to treat patients. So that's really the two differences. What the lesson learned is that in gene therapy, ocular gene therapy, all gene therapy, dose matters as far as safety and efficacy. And you need to find the sweet spot, and we're able to essentially come up with a dose that gives us that great benefit risk of best-in-class efficacy and very manageable and acceptable safety profile to move into phase 3 and eventually to the market.
Got it. Okay.
So I was just going to say, phase 3, the patient population will be even slightly broader, making sure that patients respond to anti-VEGF, because we're going to give them a permanent anti-VEGF to cure their disease or stabilize their disease at minimum. But other than that, it's a much broader patient population as you go into phase 3 than phase 2. But as I mentioned, we had these patients that required 6 injections or less. We saw 90% of them are totally free of injection.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. And with respect to safety, so part of Luna was to figure out the optimal prophylactic regimen. I believe you looked at least 4 different ones. I understand you're still analyzing those data, but so at this point, or so far, what regimen are you seeing the best profile?
So rewinding back to, Optic, we were the first to try, in addition to oral steroids, which were used classically in all gene therapy, steroid eye drops. And we saw that it works quite well, but our duration of the prophylaxis was too short. So in Luna, we decided to evaluate the role of oral steroids, as well as whether a Ozurdex implant, a dexamethasone, individual implant would be working as well, potentially removing any patient compliance or adherence issues. So we found out 2 things early on. One, oral does not add anything. So we know we don't need it for phase 3, which is a relief because it's poorly tolerated in patients at this age. 2, the Ozurdex implant, while working well for the first 8 weeks, does not last long enough during the peak immune response that we anticipate. So it needed the addition of steroid eye drops on the back end. So what we know is that the steroid eye drops actually worked really well. We had a 22 weeks prophylactic for the Luna trial. And what we're evaluating and debating is whether the Ozurdex additional implant, which is an additional injection and cost, really adds anything to the steroid eye drop. And that will be what we'll be looking at to confirm what prophylaxis moves into phase 3. And our plan is to talk about the phase 3 once we had, our interactions with regulators. We'll confirm that we are using 60-10 in a non-inferiority study compared to Eylea every 8 weeks, and what prophylactic regimen we're using. But pretty much the phase 3 study is set. What we haven't really described yet is the number of patients, the prophylactic, and any of the secondary endpoints that we may be looking at. I think it's an interesting time for gene therapy with some changes in guidance and some opportunities to really look at the way we can improve treatment burden as well.
Got it. And another question with respect to supplemental injections, I think that's been somewhat of a point of inconsistency between clinical trials and even within clinical trials. I believe even for you, there are some patients who received supplemental injections out of protocol. Can you comment on these cases and why does it happen? And are you trying to put anything in place for phase 3 to be more consistent?
Yeah, so I think that's a really important point. In all of these studies, what we know is that there may be different criteria for rescue. In our study, we had the same criteria for both the Optic study and the Luna study, which is the rescue criteria was a loss of 10 letters, an increase of 75 micron, or vision-threatening hemorrhage. The difference between the 2 studies is that in Optic, only the first injection was mandated to be reviewed by a central reading center. In Luna, the doses are masked and the rescue has to be confirmed and approved by a reading center. Otherwise, they're outside of protocol. We haven't analyzed or commented on the one that are out of protocol. You're correct that there are a few patients that had these essentially out of protocol injections. But if you think about what we see is that most of the patients had 0 injection, right? So that's pretty incredible. And if you look at the patient that rescued, we had 7 patients that only had 1 injections, all at random time points. So they're not all clustered, at week 20, 24, which we've seen with other programs. And we had 5 subjects that had more than 1 injection. So, very small number. But even if you look at these patients, there's 1 patient that had a rescue at week 4 and week 10. And that patient the year prior was injection in the eye every 4 weeks. She couldn't go beyond 4 weeks. So she really needed that treatment every 4 weeks. That patient is now free of injection for more than 9 months for the first time in her life. Even she comes across as one of the worst patients in our study. She's actually a great beneficiary of gene therapy, right? And a great success story. We have only 1 subject that had several rescue injections that were outside of the protocol, and we're looking into these. We're trying to understand if there are patients that are not really suitable for gene therapy, but we haven't seen that. And even in those patients that require some rescue injection, as I mentioned earlier with this example, we see great benefit. So, that's something we continue to see if we can optimize.
Got it. Okay. And you mentioned, now that you're approaching the end of the phase two and planning to initiate the phase three program soon, the interactions with regulators are going to increase. Ixo-vec obviously has several designations, right, both in the US and Europe, RMAT most recently. Can you comment on how these designations help with your interactions with regulators, the speed, the quantity and quality of feedback that you receive as you advance Ixo-vec forward?
Yeah, so we recently received RMAT in the US. It gives you the opportunity to have more intense and regular interaction with the agency, as well as get the potential to get accelerated review, which is obviously very important. We had received PRIME designation a while back in Europe, which is similar to breakthrough designation, and then ILAP in the UK. All of these allows us to have these interactions to really harmonize, our phase three programs with gene therapy and a lot of admission that there's still a clear medical need, right? And that's why we received those designations. So this helps us, hone in on the design and all aspects of gene therapy, including CMC, to ensure that we can get into phase three, eventually BLA filing with smooth sailing and clear, frequent interaction with regulators. So very excited about these three designations we have for this product. I think clearly showing the unmet medical need and how these agencies sees the potential of products like Ixo-vec to have a transformative impact for wet AMD.
Okay, got it. Makes sense. And thinking, one or a couple of steps further, when do you think would be a good time to start talking to payers, or have you already started, having preliminary discussions?
So we had discussions several years ago before we had long-term data, and I recall that essentially what they said at the time, right? This was quite a while ago, that unless you had at least 1 year of treatment benefit in the majority of patients, there wouldn't be a lot of differentiation. I think when you think about the payer in the US, we know that all these patients, or most of them, are above the age of 65. They're covered by Medicare Part B that spends $3.5 billion in anti-VEGF for wet AMD. And these patients live on average, 10 years. We know that we have patients past 6 years free of injection, and we continue to monitor them. So one can imagine that if we were to charge, let's say, 3 to 5 times the cost of an annual treatment with the standard of care today, we would still be saving, 5 years of injection potentially for the payers. So we think that the payers will be actually driving adoption potentially, where we could be really cost effective. So I think people think of gene therapy as rare disease, so millions of dollars for thousands of patients. Ocular gene therapy is really unique in the sense that the doses that we're delivering, E10, are very cost effective to manufacture. They're not E12, E13, which is obviously a lot higher for systemic gene therapy. And so we can really think about this as tens of thousands of dollars for millions of patients. So really, potentially the first mass market gene therapy. And obviously, we will be talking to payers in the upcoming months to talk about that more specifically. But we think we have a value proposition that will be beneficial to payers, to patients, as well as to retina specialists.
Got it. Okay. And with the other treatments that are designed to extend the treatment interval, including Eylea HD and some of the TKIs in development as well. Are you seeing increased pressure on gene therapy to perform well? How is that changing your thinking in general?
Yeah, I mean, the TKIs are very interesting. We know that they can last 6 months, maybe longer. They still require some rescues, right, in some patients up to 6 months. But we also know that the way they'll be adopted, I believe, is that there'll be an implant every 6 months. So if you imagine, 5 years of treatment ahead of you when you're diagnosed or longer, that would mean 10 injections in the eye every 6 months, right? It's better than the current standard of care where it's, you don't really know if you're going to be able to get to every 12 or 16 weeks with the current treatment. So it's an improvement, but it's not the same as getting one injection and done, right, for most patients. And that's what we're aiming to. And I think gene therapy should really, anything below 50% of being free of injection would be, somewhat closer to the TKIs and not as interesting. But if you're above 50%, I think it's a really value proposition that is highly differentiated. So you're correct. I think if you look at 6 months or 1 year, there's not necessarily a lot of differentiation. If you look at 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, there's really
Mhm.
nobody left, right? Nobody is free of injection if they receive one TKI or one Eylea HD or one Vabysmo. And, as I mentioned earlier, we were really surprised to see that we had 10 of the 60 patients in Luna that had received Vabysmo the year prior. And it's clear that those improvements with the Vabysmo, led to a $4 billion product. Every percent that you would capture with gene therapy would be about $350 million. So if you capture 3% of the market, it'd be like $1 billion product, which is pretty remarkable. All patients that were in Vabysmo to date are free of injection. So imagine that transformative potential and how cost effective that could be if you think, 5, 10 years of treatment for most patients.
Got it. Okay. I see we're coming up on time. Just a couple more questions. One is in terms of where the company in terms of cash position and the runway, and what are the assumptions going into into this?
Yes, so we have roughly $173 million at the end of the last quarter. That takes us into the end of 2025. We are obviously talking about potential ex-US partnerships as well as financing the phase 3, including partnerships, royalties, and eventually equity financing as well. So we believe that, the data we're generating and our next data cut will be the 9 months data that will be presenting fourth quarter. The clarity around the phase 3, including its size, which will determine the cost of that phase 3 trial, will help us, finalize these combination of financing opportunities, including partnering, royalty, and equity financing. So we look forward to providing these updates, and then we'll have the 1 year data from Luna in the first quarter of next year, and we plan to start our phase 3 in the first half of next year as well.
Got it. Excellent. And one last question to bring it all together. Big picture question. What do you think investors are still generally missing about Adverum's story?
I think is the fact that we have established the safety with, now 3 going on 4 year safety. We have established that tenfold safety margin, and we have a best-in-class target product profile. I think, overall gene therapy has been a challenging space. I think we are coming out now with a lot of data supported that there are several, gene therapy program moving forward for these large indications. And I think as we have clarity around the phase 3, as we've seen with the TKIs, people will start paying attention as we get closer to phase 3 and dosing phase 3 patients. And as we continue to present the data that we have, which I think is really clearly best in class. So we see a lot of positive, a lot of, high quality funds coming into the stock. And we continue to be out there to reshare that data, which I think is still, poorly known across the board. So we're very happy to be here to present it. And of course, we like to present new data at scientific forum, but also we'll continue to, attend conferences to really share how this data is impacting patients and how patients think about it. Because I think people just look about, numbers, number of injections, how frequent. But in the end, I'm focusing on delivering something that patients want and need. And it's very clear from that, survey that, the majority of them prefer what we're offering than the current treatment of standard of care. So I think this bodes very well for the success of Ixo-vec once we get through BLA filing approval and eventually to the market.
Got it. Excellent. Thank you, Laurent. I think this brings us to the end of the session. Really appreciate having you.
Thank you, Danielle. Great to attend. Thanks a lot.